welcome back to another edition of MD, PhD, ETC. And today we're continuing on the talks and what I hope will eventually form a book on the magic of the masculine mind and masculine psychology, its positives and negatives. So the first place that we probably have to start with this, and what today's talk will be devoted to, is, well, what is a man? That may seem like a rather obvious question, but both biologically and sociologically, it's actually been more complicated than you might think. Now, there did seem to be an answer to this. On the 19th of July in 1990, an article was published in the scientific journal Nature, which is generally regarded as the most prestigious journal in the scientific literature. And a research team that was led by Andrew Sinclair at the Imperial Cancer Research Fund in London announced that they had revealed one of the great secrets of the universe. They had found was the master gene on the Y chromosome that causes a mammalian embryo to develop as male. This so-called sex-determining region, or is abbreviated as SRY, is a strip of DNA most commonly located on the short arm of the Y chromosome. It's present in a wide variety of species, ranging from mice to tigers, horses and cattle, chimpanzees, and of course us, humans. The section of DNA, the SRY, creates a protein which in turn has a small portion that binds to and bends other pieces of DNA. Those bindings and bendings set off a whole cascade of events of development that eventually leads to the physical male form in most cases. The immediately noticeable effect, if you were looking at embryos, is the formation of sex cords. These are special clusters of cells arising from a ridge along embryos. These sex cords will later turn into seminiferous tubules. And this is the specialized spaces where sperm are made. Those creatures who carry this SRY gene among their genetic makeup create testes, and then testes create testosterone, and generally the characteristics associated with being male. Those who lack it do not. Those sex organs then determine both embryonically and later at puberty the physical form of a person's life. Everything from whether a person has a penis at birth, whether they develop hair on their bodies as a teen or later lose it on their head, are all linked to this gene. It affects then societal things, whether they're likely to marry, who they're likely to determine as their mate, whether they'll be called a king or something else. All of this appears dependent on this one little snippet of DNA called the SRY. Or so we thought. SRY was by any means a huge step in science. I don't mean to diminish that accomplishment. Its discovery led to finding a whole family of related genes which play a role in development, and a wider understanding of the developmental process in general. But even from the beginning, we knew that there were problems in this straightforward story. Even the basic biology isn't so simple. For example, there is a condition called androgen insensitivity syndrome, in which a person will have a perfectly normal SRY gene and in fact develop testicles. However, unless one's a surgeon or a radiologist, these testes would be impossible to see. They remain located within the body, roughly in the position where one would expect to find ovaries. And the testosterone that those testes produce seems to have no influence at all. A person with androgen insensitivity syndrome will, despite having a Y chromosome and despite having this specific male gene, will have a vagina rather than a penis, and will develop breasts rather than the extra muscle mass during puberty. They are, to all outward appearances, 100% female. These individuals are infertile, but other than that, before methods of modern detection, they probably would have led lives no different from that of any other woman. There are rumors, as a matter of fact, that certain famous actresses having androgen insensitivity syndrome. I have no special knowledge of this, and I won't thus speculate on it or subjects these women to that sort of speculation. But there are a couple of people who have come out quite publicly. These women tend to be tall and thin, and there's a higher percentage who are models than in the general population. If you wish to see a person who sort of typifies this and who is public about it, I hope I don't mess up her name, Odile, Odiele. Here's a picture of her. Is one such individual who's come out quite publicly about her condition. It may change your mind about what someone who's intersex looks like. And we'll talk at length later in future videos about transgender individuals and what that teaches us about the masculine and feminine mind. But for the moment, I want to stick to the basic biology, and androgen insensitivity is but one of the ways that biology gets complicated. Beyond the structure of the body, we must also concede that not everyone who is physically male is a masculine thinker. Of those who are masculine, others would still fall far short of what we would think of as male with a capital M. Clearly, society and upbringing alter our behavior. Masculinity is not just biology. The psychologist William James, who's one of my favorite people in history, and was the father of a school of philosophy called pragmatism, he, along with the developers of Stoicism, are the psychologies most often associated with masculine thinking. And an essential tenet of pragmatism, of James' philosophy, is that things are true to the extent to which they are useful. For example, we accept scientific facts over mystical ones, not because we're absolutely sure that science reflects an unrefutable set of assumptions about the universe. Our models of the universe have changed a lot over time. But rather, we accept science because physics allows us to fly rockets to the moon, to develop medicines, to do these amazing things, and believing in chi doesn't. Not to knock chi or spiritualism, that may help you as an individual, but in terms of practically predicting the future, we believe that science is more, quote, true because it's practically true. So if we look at that in terms of masculinity, of what makes a man, we must confess that there's very little we can do about our chromosomes, at least not for the foreseeable 100 years or so. If it's not pragmatic to worry so much about biology, then maybe we shouldn't consider it too much in our definition. Conversely, if we look at the masculine ideal, it contains attitudes that we can adapt and adopt, behaviors we can reproduce, and thinking patterns that we can learn. Also, we can modify them so that they're hopefully more useful than perhaps older types of masculine thinking. It can therefore be considered helpful and true in defining a man if we think about an ideal that we can emulate. So, who or what is the ideal man? We don't all agree on this by any stretch. There have been people in history who have been held up as this. In America, maybe our most famous example is our founding father, George Washington. King George III said, upon learning that George Washington resigned the presidency rather than serving as monarch, he called George Washington the greatest man in the world. Of course, that title has also been often conferred among other leaders, king or religious leaders, but it's hard to differentiate flattery in that case from what people truly idealize. If we look at our democratic leaders, Thomas Jefferson cited Bacon, Newton, and Locke as his paradigms of science, and of natural philosophy. Seneca was one of the founders of Stoicism, was reluctant to name such an individual, but said the greatest man is he who chooses right. So virtue, and a particular type of virtue, got wrapped up very early in ideas of of masculine ideals. But the general concept was that maybe that ideal also existed more in hope than in history. So, masculine archetypes have grown up in history and in mythology in particular. We can look at, the leaders of gods often epitomize this. So Odin or Zeus, then the heroes as well, Gilgamesh, Odysseus, Beowulf, King Arthur, Hercules. In American history, maybe Paul Bunyan or John Henry, steel-driving man, right? All ring out as these super male examples from legend. And then there are also some in history. But there's also been a translation of the legends into modern as well. We haven't forgotten those legends. If you see this now translated into Superman and Batman and Captain America, we've humanized those super figures in forms of James Bond or Dirty Harry or John Spade or John Shaft. They flew into space as Han Solo or Buck Rogers and Captain Kirk. We've had them as father figures, like in Atticus Finch or Jean Valjean in the character identified only as the father in Cormac McCarthy's The Road. Sometimes they're younger, male ideals of Holden Caulfield or Huckleberry Finn or maybe Harry Potter in modern parlance. They've been doctors, as in Dr. Kildare or Zhivago or House or Doctor Who, perhaps. They've been scoundrels, Long John Silver, Walter White, Tony Soprano. Sometimes they're in between, like Don Draper, Jack Bauer, Rick Grimes, Colonel Potter, these people who are very complicated, neither heroes nor villains, but unquestionably strong men. Every character ever played by John Wayne probably fits this bill. So what do these characters have in common, and what makes them masculine? Both Batman and Superman are superheroes, but is Batman, with his grim determination and vulnerability to physical things, more or less masculine than Superman? And that character's overt physical powers and moral superiority? Does the youth and incomplete boyish nature of Huckleberry Finn or Harry Potter disqualify them from being ideal men, more so than, say, the villainy of Tony Soprano or Long John Silver? We need to refine it further to seek out our true ideal and then use that to shape our definition. So I want to point out another series of YouTube videos that I think is fun, kind of looking at this and comparing and contrasting and who's stronger and more masculine. There's a video series called Epic Rap Battles of History. They're a lot of fun if you haven't checked them out before. And they imagine real-life figures, including Teddy Roosevelt versus Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln versus Chuck Norris, exchanging barbs over their manly strength. Another YouTube videos took this one step further and created epic rap battles of manliness, in which two neighbors challenge each other over the claims that they can smell the fear of bees or tie fishing lures while memorizing Apache war cries. In each battle, however, it's left up to us to decide who really won, who's more masculine. Psychologists, or my field, psychiatrists, have made less entertaining, but perhaps somewhat more practical attempts to define and qualify masculinity. There was a review by Thompson and Beckett in 2015 that looked through the whole scientific literature and found that there are no less than 16 different measurements of masculinity from the scientific literature. The granddaddy of these is the Brannon masculinity scales. It stems from the works of psychologists Robert Branson and Samuel Juni. And in the 1970s, they looked at the American blueprint of what a man is supposed to be. They defined dimensions which include avoiding femininity. So they're sort of looking at being the opposite. Concealing emotions, collectively called no sissy stuff in the scales. I love 1970 scales for using plain English. Being a breadwinner and being admired and respected, or the big wheel aspect of this, toughness and male sturdiness or sturdy oak qualities, violence or adventure characteristics, or give them hell characteristics. So this was used to kind of look at how masculine or feminine somebody might be. However, one of the difficulties was that these characteristics vary across time and culture. And again, this was defined in the 1970s, so it might fit John Wayne or Dirty Harry, but does that define masculinity across the board? In more recent tests, there's something like the Multicultural Masculinity Ideology Scale, have attempted to find more universal truths about how masculinity is defined. Using this scale, academics have studied that and discovered different things about different cultures. For example, men in Chile were more likely to identify toughness, poise, and responsibility as essential masculine traits, whereas Americans were unique in adding sensitivity as a masculine trait in the study. In there, if you look at subgroups within Americans, African Americans added sexual responsibility to the lists of characteristics that define a man, and all groups considered achievement and posturing to be particularly masculine traits. Looking at this, I did find it a little odd that my American counterparts would say that sensitivity or sexual responsibility were distinctly masculine. Not that those are bad things, fine characteristics, but it's not the first thing I think about when I consider a character like the hypermasculine James Bond. And this may represent one of the limits to academic studies. Almost all the work is done via surveys, and often with college-age and college-educated students. Almost all of this will generally give the view that masculinity is rooted in archetypes that are older and more working class than the people who are giving the answers. One author noted, as part of the American Psychological Association, characteristic defines masculinity as defined by strength, stoicism, aggression, and power. Yet research published by the same association shows, and on surveys at least, it's indicated by none of these. So these face-to-face surveys produce visions of masculinity that are counterintuitive and seemingly counter to what our history would show us. So in interviews where men are asked to identify, quote, the manliest thing about me, I've come up with answers like my heart, my ability to show emotion, I cry, my vulnerability. This sort of answer seems particularly prevalent among groups such as Promise Keepers or others that attempt to recapture masculinity. A psychologist by the name of, I think it's Aurelius Gordon, postulated that this may be a type of reaction formation. In other words, that we say the opposite of what we actually mean out of a shame about what being male is, projected into saying the exact opposite of what we personally feel a man is on a deeper and perhaps more honest level. So turning away from the academic studies to more mainstream means of polling, similar to what you would expect in gathering electoral data. Somebody calls you up on the phone and sort of anonymous, and they just ask general public. The Pew Trust produced a particularly interesting survey, I think, on masculine and feminine traits. They polled 4,573 Americans, not on their own view of gendered traits, but what they thought society thinks are characteristics a man or woman should have. So it sort of removes the personal responsibility. Well, I don't think this, but he thinks that or she thinks that. I thought that was a rather brilliant polling method. And of course, there's the anonymity involved, which also probably reduced some of the stigma. And when you look at the results of this, I don't know if they're truly more honest, but they definitely produced results that seem more in line with what reading the culture would seem to show. Kindness, for example, was universally regarded as a positive trait, but one that was associated more with women than with men. Similarly, aggression was viewed as negative by both genders, but was more typical and seen as more forgivable in a man. Responders were much more likely to use the word powerful in a positive way to describe men. About 67% viewed this as a positive view of masculinity, where it was often viewed as a negative in women. 92% negative in women. That was surprising to me. Honest was a positive descriptor for both men and women, but twice as likely to be used when describing an ideal man versus an ideal woman. Leadership and ambition were similarly much more associated with ideal versions of masculinity. Compassion was viewed almost as a universal positive in women, but actually viewed as a negative in men. Words most often seen as particularly male positives were a protective, provider, father, and honorable. Whereas negative terms for male include abusive, sexism, but also things that you might not think of as negative, such as emotional, feeling, or vulnerable was viewed as a negative in males. Interesting, there was a lot more agreement on what was negative in males than in women, but less agreement as well about what is positive in males. So we look at this in terms of surveys, and ideals, but perhaps one step further is to look at what particularly masculine men said about it themselves. So I looked up a few quotes, which I want to read you here, which I think plays into it. So Jack Donovan, quote, "Strength, courage, mastery, and honor are the alpha virtues in all men over the world." Frank Abagnale, quote, "A real man loves his wife and places his family as the most important thing in life. Nothing has brought me more peace and contentment in life than simply being a good husband and father." George Patton, there's a masculine man if there ever was one. And short and brief, quote, "Duty is the essence of manhood." John Wayne, "A man's got to have a code, a creed to live by, no matter his job." I wish I could do that in a John Wayne accent. Maybe I'll find a way to clip the video in here. David Gilmour, "Manhood is the defeat of childhood narcissism." A little egg-headed maybe, but if you want to look at religious views, Paul the Apostle, "Be alert, stand firm in the faith, act like a man, be strong." Gandhi, "Manliness consists not of bluff or bravado or loneliness. It consists in daring to do the right thing and facing consequences, whether it is in matters social, political, or others. It consists in deeds, not words." I love that one, by the way. Gandhi was a great speaker. Norman Mailer, "Masculinity is not something given to you, something you're born with, but something you gain, and something you gain by winning small battles with honor." You saw the earlier lecture, that Marine Corps recruiting ad, and the idea that this was something that's earned, I think very much plays into it. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most famous of the Stoics and great Roman emperor, "Waste no more time in arguing what a good man should be one." So with all due respect to Marcus Aurelius and that last quote, I do want to give one last, what I think is a beautiful view of masculinity. And then we're going to work on how we be a good man, just as Emperor Aurelius commanded us. And this is Rudyard Kipling's If. Rudyard Kipling has fallen a little out of favor, perhaps in modern times, for his imperialistic views of the world. But the beauty of his language and his beauty and ability to define things in a way that is particularly masculine, I think is quite impressive. So if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good or talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the truth you've spoken, twisted by knaves to give you a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn-out tools. If you can make one heap of all your winnings and risk it on one turn of pitch and toss, and lose and start again at your beginnings, and never breathe a word about your loss. If you can force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn along after they are gone, and so hold on when there is nothing in you except the will which says to them, hold on. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings, nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minutes with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And, which is more, you'll be a man, my son. Heady words, a lot to live up to. Being a man isn't apparently so easy, and distilling it all into the biology, the social pressures, the statements about what makes a good man is certainly no easier. Yet some things do stand out. Note that there is nothing in any of these descriptions of manhood that requires him to be a certain size or race or come from a particular background. There is nothing about with whom he has sex or how many times. There's nothing about political party or religion or what clothes he wears. The Scottish revolutionary William Wallace managed to be quite a man while wearing what in any other context would be a skirt. Turning back to William James and his pragmatism, we will consider, as James did himself, that a man is not one thing. The great man may shape his environment, but he will also be shaped by it. He will take different forms depending on the challenges to be faced. This doesn't mean that we have to throw up our hands altogether in seeking a definition of the ideal masculine outlook. There are unifying characteristics that allow adaptation to a variety of situations and challenges. Just as intelligence or opposable thumbs are characteristics that broadly allowed humankind to adapt to a wide variety of environments, certain traits of men are widely useful. The ideal man is strong, perhaps not physically, but most definitely in character. He is the protector, not the protected. He is the aggressor, not the victim. He is independent, but aware of his role within the larger world. He has self-confidence that comes from having been tested. He knows that he has weaknesses, but these do not need to stop him. He accomplishes his goals through bravery or determination or force of will or whatever variety of abilities he may draw on. He faces what is hard. Regardless of the cost, he does what needs to be done. I think that last statement about doing what needs to be done is, as Marcus Aurelius would have it, the essence of the thing. Masculinity is characterized, perpetuated, and the end defined through its utility. Masculinity may grow from biology or from society through psychology or philosophy. It is associated with something as simple as the Y chromosome or the sex-determining region of that chromosome, but it is not limited by it. Masculinity and masculine thinking may occur through a wide variety of different features that combine to allow for power. Power is not the be-all, end-all by any means. It does not be what maybe you want to accomplish. Certainly there are paths to happiness in life that involve neither masculinity nor power. Your individual goal might be more to overthrow power than to accomplish it. That's up to you. However, if you allow that masculinity and power are fundamentally linked, whether for good or evil, then you must understand how this came to be and how to accomplish it. These are topics of further study, and we'll keep talking about it on this channel and elsewhere. Well, I hope you'll help by helping me to refine the ideas and helping other people to define this and think about it in the future. We'll now continue to examine the thing that hopefully we have defined. Thank you.